Hi, this is Russell Javors, and you're listening to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast.
Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
Probably the last thing you think of when it comes to Billy Joel's music is reggae, but that influence is there, and if it's subtle, it's because it comes from arguably the most understated member of the classic Lords of 52nd Street, Russell Javors.
In a band where the spotlight is squarely on the piano, Russell's rhythm guitar playing was tight, economical, and often in the background.
But it was always in the right place at the right time. To paraphrase drummer Liberty DeVitto, you don't always notice what Russell's playing, but you'll notice when it's not there.
Russell played on many of Billy's biggest hits and logged hundreds of shows over more than a decade of touring with the band. Before that, he was part of Topper, the group that would become the longtime backing band for Billy.
And he was always writing his own songs in the background, a few of which were released by different artists. His music, both with Billy and on his own, has shades of classic 70s singer-songwriters, while also portraying his love of the Beatles, rockabilly, and reggae, among other influences.
After departing the Billy Joel Band before the Stormfront album, Russell made a radical, while ultimately fulfilling, career change. And today, he's back on tour with the Lords of 52nd Street, celebrating the music he and his friends helped make into modern classics.
For this episode, we spoke with Liberty DeVitto, Richie Cannata, and Russell's son Jesse Javors.
Join us for part one of a very special two-part series on Russell Javors, where we talk with some of the people who know him best.
This episode was a different approach for us.
Let me tell you, I was excited to do this one. I think Russell is really the most underdocumented and understated member of the Lords of 52nd Street. I think, Doug certainly lives on in legend, not only for his work, but also for being so instrumental in getting the band together. Liberty is just Liberty. He's just bigger than life. Richie does so much, work now that, his name stays up there. And Russell's, as he was on record, he sort of is very quiet, very understated, always sort of serving someone other than himself in a lot of ways, which is something that actually happened at a pivotal point in his career, as we'll find out later.
You're right about that. He is such a nice guy, incredibly funny, and has such a storied career that was really a treat to finally get on record here.
So before we get into all the great stories, let's just do some snapshot biographical information. Much of this comes from the Long Island Music Hall of Fame website, limusichall-of-fame.org. It says Russell Javors was born in Brooklyn in 1952 and spent his childhood in Plainview, that's on Long Island. He developed his musical chops in a junior high school band, and at age 15 began going to My House, a popular club in Plainview, to watch other local bands perform, especially two of his favorites, The Hassles, featuring Billy Joel, and New Rock Workshop with drummer Liberty DeVitto. Javors and DeVitto became friends, and the two spent many afternoons at DeVitto's house in Seaford trying to put a band together. Javors was introduced to Doug Stegmeyer in high school. With his parents' support, Javors met with his musician friends regularly at his house. He and Plainview guitarist Howie Emerson would sit for hours, working out guitar parts and arrangements to Javors' songs. Eventually, Javors, Emerson, DeVitto, and Stegmeyer would get together to play. They'd record sessions with Stegmeyer's brother Al, who was a musician and accomplished engineer. Al would lead them to form a band known as Topper. In 1974, Doug Stegmeyer began a fate-changing tour with Billy Joel. When Joel decided to record with New York musicians in 1976, he turned to Stegmeyer, who gradually brought DeVitto, Emerson, and Javors into the fold. The four musicians, with Richie Cannata, would bring their unique spark to the songs that formed Joel's album Turnstiles. Over the years, Javors also worked with Karen Carpenter, Slash, Phoebe Snow, and Iggy Pop, among others. Later, his work in the toy industry eventually landed him in Hong Kong as vice president of a large Chinese manufacturing company. So that's the basics. That's the skeleton of the story. And we are honored to put the flesh on the bones, if you will.
He's a great guy. His stories are so good. And he's had quite a career, from the music he made growing up with Doug and Liberty and later Richie and David. They were his brothers. So it's so fitting that he came back to this music in recent years.
And, we stressed the reggae thing in the intro, and that really came out of something Russell told us during our chat with him when he was talking about, in particular, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me. And once he described what he was doing and where it was coming from, it just, to me, just broke open so much more of Billy's music and really explained one of the many things, that made this music so unique. I don't know if it's going to make it into the final cut, but, Michael and I were telling Russell at one point, just, how much Billy's music meant to us, that was our Beatles. And I said, yeah, it almost like ruined me for other music. You could always tell Billy's music was different somehow. Even as a kid, you couldn't put your finger on it. And, all these years later, you just get this little glimmer of something that just opens up another dimension to the music that explains so much.
They all had the common influences. The Beatles touched everyone in that band. To hear some of these schools of playing and, the reggae influence and these different influences that fit so well into the pop music that Billy Joel was writing at the time, it was a perfect marriage. And this band and Russell fit Billy's music so well and really brought some life to these fantastic songs.
And we're going to get into those stories and all these great conversations in a moment. But I did want to point out that if you're looking to hear more of Russell's music, the album you need to go find is Karen Carpenter's self-titled album. It was recorded between 1979 and 1980, but it wasn't released until well after Carpenter had passed away. The album actually came out in 1996. On that album, the songs All Because of You and Still in Love with You were written by Javors, and the record was produced by Phil Ramone. So those are the two clearest examples of his writing for other people, but stay tuned this time because we have some exclusive stuff for you coming up. Russell, because he's the awesome dude he is, emailed us a couple songs which we'll discuss. And we're talking demos with Just Liberty, stuff he recorded with Doug, possibly a song by Topper, a band I think all us huge Billy Joel fans have heard the name of over and over and over again and have never heard a note of. So we're going to hear a little of that music, and we're also going to hear why we haven't heard that music before. How's that for a cliffhanger?
Yeah, no kidding. You'll get a glimpse of his writing and his, with the guitar being a little more upfront with some of this material, it'll help kind of place in your head where his playing fit into a lot of the Billy Joel music. I think you'll hear a lot of his school of playing that will now lead you to some of those Billy Joel songs.
Right. So with all that in mind, let's start off with a conversation with one of Russell's oldest friends, Liberty DeVitto.
Birds of a feather, we both fly over the storm, very much in love.
The first time I met Russell was when his father dropped him off at my parents' house. Russell was 15 years old. I think I was 17. I was actually playing with the New Rock Workshop at the time. I met Russell through the My House, where the New Rock Workshop played. And Harry Weber was Elizabeth Weber's brother. He was in the Hassles before Billy. Billy took his place. So he wanted to start a new band. So it was me, Russ, and Harry. Unfortunately, Harry left the planet way too soon, and that band never happened.
You and he became friends at that point and still maintained that relationship, even though that initial band didn't come to anything, huh?
Yeah, well, we remained friends, and he was very young, and I was only 17, didn't have a driver's license, so I went through the whole Mitch Ryder thing and everything like that. Then the whole Topper thing was starting, because I went through the Mitch Ryder phase, and then the super phase, and that's where I had my a car accident. And after my car accident, I wanted nothing to do with music. But I was already dabbling in stuff with Russ and Doug. I remember being invited to Russell's house. He was having a party in his backyard. I was invited because Russ thought it would spark something in me to want to play, because I had given up drums then. After my car accident, I got engaged. I was going to lead a normal life. And so I get invited to this party in his backyard. And him and a bunch of guys, Doug Stegmeyer, one of them, started to play. And a friend of his, Kenny Romanowski, who was a fantastic guitar player, started to play. They did a version of Blackbird where Russ would do the Blackbird sitting in the dead of night, and then Kenny would play this ripping guitar in between every line. You know, it was great. But at the time, there was another guitar player playing too, and that was Howard Emerson. I was impressed, but not inspired yet. So I walked away from that like, oh, those guys are really good. Well, good luck to them. But Russ kept hounding me and coming over my house and leaving notes and all kinds of things like that. He would burst into my house and I'd be sleeping and he'd put a 45 on the turntable of the record player. It was in my room, and say, listen to this. This is so great. This is rock and roll. We need to do this. We need, I was like, I'm done.
That was one takeaway I caught from your book too, that I never knew that story, how out of everyone, he was the one friend who wasn't going to have you let go of that.
No. Him and my friend Bob Ray, who led me to the weddings that when I thought I needed money,
Yeah.
but I thought I was insane for doing, playing the weddings, but I learned more than I ever learned there. And I eventually got Doug to play with me there. And Ivan Elias, who went on to play with Scandal. We all played weddings,
yeah.
And it was the most fun I ever had. But me and Doug were doing Topper now at the same time as we were playing the weddings. So we're making money doing the weddings, losing money playing with Topper.
So that was kind of funding you, you were making enough to allow you to try to do this and not have to worry so much about money and Topper.
Kind of like when the actors do these movies that you watch and you say, why are they doing that movie? And that's to fund the movies that they really want to do. Billy was very smart at what he did. I mean, taking Topper as a unit, he got the tightest band that you could possibly get. When people say, wow, I saw Billy Joel on the Turnstiles tour, you guys were so tight. Yeah, well, me, Doug, Russell, and Howard were playing for years together. Of course we were tight.
Especially, I remember the story you said where, Billy overheard some of the other guys bad-mouthing him and then realizing that Doug wasn't part of that group. Right. I think, he could see that, okay, so if I can trust Doug here, I think I'm going to trust his opinion on, who to play with me. And
the way it happened was so great. Me and Doug recording Turnstiles with Billy, just the three of us. And then Billy saying, oh, we need guitar players. You know any? Yeah, we do. As a matter of fact.
And there's something about I don't know if the word innocence is right, but just there's not so much wrapped up in the session to where there's so many hands in it. It's just you guys in the room.
Right.
And him deciding like, hey, let's try this, let's do this. There's no one leaning over your shoulder saying, no, or, do this instead. You could just make the call you felt was right at the time.
That's what was great about the first album, Turnstiles, was like, it was just us. There was no producer or whatever telling us what to do. Mm-hmm. We were doing what we felt, well, this sounds good, Yeah. I think this will fit in the song. I think this will be great, You
guys already felt like a unit, even without somebody, a producer steering the ship.
And bringing Russ and Howard in, they added so much, because Russ played a beautiful acoustic guitar. You heard the Topper stuff, you know what it sounds like. The parts that Russ came up with on the acoustic guitar. Just beautiful. And nobody could play reggae, like in All You Want to Do Is Dance. Nobody could play those chicks like Russell did because the Topper was doing reggae in the clubs when reggae was unheard of.
Right. I want to touch back a little more on Topper. So tell me about a little bit how that really kind of came together once you decided to start playing again, how you and Russell and, Doug and everyone really started going.
I was engaged to a girl, believe it or not. Married 3 times, engaged once. A loser. Anyway, so I was engaged to this girl, Diane, when I was playing the weddings. Broke up with her because the waitresses became very interesting at the weddings. So I couldn't do well. Anyway, so when Topper started, I had nothing to lose. I mean, I was making a couple of bucks playing the weddings. I'm playing with Doug, and we were now forming Topper and rehearsing at Russell and Suzanne. They had been together now as a couple. Mm-hmm. And, because Suzanne, I first met Suzanne, she was 8 years old, and I was banging my drumsticks on the back of the school bus seat that she was sitting in. That's how I met Suzanne.
So you go that far back with Suzanne?
Yeah. Way back, with Suzanne and Jerry. And so playing with Topper, I was learning. At the end of my book, when I put that band family tree together, and I put with Topper, I put down, I was learning how to be original, with Topper. The way Russell played, I remember Howard Emerson telling me this. He goes, "Do you think you would play as good as you did if you never played with Russell?" And I have to say, I probably wouldn't play as good as I do now, because Russell taught me tricks that are lasting when the listener hears them.
Right.
They're not just flashy stuff, and they're little tricks that you do that, that you listen as a drummer, and you don't go, "Oh my God, that was so great." You go like, "Wow, that was cool." Like that kind of stuff. Because of Russell's playing and trying to follow along with him, and of course Doug was right there with him too. So playing with those two guys and Howard just putting his slide up on top, just really formed me into the drummer that Billy got,
You talk about, the next thing I was going to actually talk to you about was describing Russell's playing, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I remember the first time hearing the Topper material, it was so unorthodox, but still wrapped in a pop song in a way.
Right. He plays inside his movements of his guitar. He sings inside there.
Right.
It's like almost percussion in his vocals.
Yeah. There's a much different attack than typical singers.
And he has that really long vibrato, that
Yeah.
That's really cool in slow songs, and the way he stops things just by holding the strings rather than cutting it short, just holds the strings and makes them go away.
His style is so uncommon. Like I've never seen a guitar player that plays that naturally the way he does.
I'm so glad that he doesn't play with a lot of other people, because his style has stayed the same. He just sent me a demo of a song that he just wrote. It's so good. It is so Russell. It's unbelievable. He wants me to put drums on it now. I got to put drums on it.
As a rhythm guitar player with Billy, Russell is the kind of player where it doesn't necessarily stand out in the mix of the unit, but if it's gone, there's a void.
Well, it's funny you say that, because my brother Vinny, when he came, he used to come to the shows all the time. We played on Long Island. And one night he said to me, "I don't know what Russell does, but when he stops, it's really noticeable." It's like pulling out John Lennon out of a Beatles song. It's
such an unglamorous school of guitar playing,
right? But
it really is the glue that brings it all together, I feel.
From learning how to play guitar, a little rhythm, just messing around playing rhythm guitar, I realized that, wow, this is really connected to the hi-hat that I'm playing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing going on. And even in the song Just the Way You Are, the way the drums got into the song was the sound of that brush it's the same timbre as the sound of those acoustic guitars that were being played. There's definitely a thing to rhythm playing,
Yeah. And the one thing I always notice too with Russell is you could feel it in his body movement on stage too. Like he had this shoulder roll that would just work with what he was playing. Visually, if you look for it, you'll see it. But I always thought that was fascinating how it was all connected there with him.
He was he still is such a rocker. Yeah. I'll never forget the time he came in my room and put on Here Knocking by Dave Edmunds. And it was like, listen to this. This is it. It's like rock and roll is going to be saved. Thank goodness there's something like this now.
Yeah.
I remember him coming over and bringing Springsteen's first album and going like, wow, this is what they're calling the new music. This is going to be the new thing. And we were both like, that's cool, but
Yeah.
a lot of chords.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then we hooked up with the chord master himself, the guy that can't play 1-4-5. Got to put something else in there before he gets to the 5.
Right. Yeah. You talked about a little bit, when you guys were working on Turnstiles, and so it seemed like it was such a very natural thing when you guys recommended Russell. Billy was just like, absolutely, sure.
We were recording Topper songs as we were doing Turnstiles, because we were in Ultrasonic Studios recording Russell. When Russell wasn't a part of it, it was a little disappointing that we had to go with Billy and leave Russell as Topper,
Right.
But me and Doug had done most of the tracks that Russell wanted to record.
Mm-hmm.
And he just had to do the vocals. And then when I heard the things later, there was strings on them and everything, and it was really, really good,
Wow.
And then when we went to Australia once, Columbia Records there was very interested in Russell and Topper. And we went and recorded a song in Australia as like a demo for Columbia Records. Yeah. And you know the story in the book. It's like Russell was headed for a deal, and then it was squashed because somebody told Billy he'd lose his band.
Billy didn't want to lose the rest of you. His deal was a no-go.
He had a lot of influence at the time, Billy.
Yeah, because if this was 3 years earlier, it probably would have been no problem.
And I write the book from that perspective, like, why did Billy do these things? Well, his career has been like 50 years now. You have to do things like that. It's not being mean. It's just like, I have to do this because I need to keep this band so I can keep going, or do I let this band go out themselves and then I fall, and then what if they don't make it,
Because obviously, there was that period where Russell wasn't playing with you guys with Billy, obviously. Do you remember what his side of it was at the time? Was it that a tough thing for him to deal with, or was he, how was he dealing with all that?
After we recorded Turnstiles, Russell went on the Turnstiles. Well, I don't even think Russell went on a Turnstiles tour. He might have gone up with just Howard went on that.
He did part of it. It's funny because Jack and I have been going through some of these old shows to put some timeline together. It was Russell originally, and then it transitioned to Howard,
right.
And Russell was gone. And then by the time the Stranger Cycle came along, that was that Frank guy for a bit. And then
right.
Russell came on near the end of that.
Right. And Russell stayed up until after the Bridge album.
Right.
Up until Stormfront.
Right.
Yeah. Then David Brown came in at about the same time Russell came back. 52nd Street. Yeah. And that combo was great.
That's one thing that took things up another notch too when David Brown came into the fold. And I don't think people ever thought of Billy Pryor as a 2-guitarist band because it was so piano driven, but the way the two of them worked together.
Yeah.
Talk about never stepping on each other's toes, but complementing each other so well. So fun to see the two of them play.
They knew how to do it. Like Russell and Howard knew how to do it. So did Russell and David. It's hard now when we find guitar players for the Lords to find a guitar player that can play with Russ, because he's so in his thing. A lot of players, bass players, have a difficult time sometimes playing with me because I'm so in my thing, especially playing Billy songs. They have to learn how the bass was played in those songs in order to play with me. And that's, the songs that Russell played on with Billy, the guitar player, the other second guitar player has to figure out what did Russell do, so it's great playing with the Lords now because we're all there.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's comedy.
Obviously you guys started playing with Billy at the Turnstiles era. Was there any moment or like any time period where it kind of clicked where you all felt like, you all had something like really special at your hand, on your hands, not the hits, not the success, but just felt musically that, okay, this is something great.
I never felt that. I never felt like, well, we're great. No,
yeah.
I think that would have put us in the Eagles category or something like that. Like,
not like thinking like, oh, we're amazing, but just that you had something special between you guys.
Well, we knew we had something special because, Phil Ramone was the one that took us under his wing, knowing that this was special. This combination of players was definitely a special. Mm-hmm. Billy knew it because he said on Glass Houses, I want that band that's playing live to play with me, everybody in the studio. Nobody overdubs. There's no overdubs on the Glass Houses album. It's just us, the same guys that you saw on the stage.
I think here's something we should touch on a bit. Russell's sense of humor.
I told, we were talking, you obviously know I have a 4-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So me and Anna and May, my 4-year-old, are sitting at the breakfast table the other day. And we were talking about ballet. Oh, no, karate. We're talking about karate. Because May is taking Taekwondo now. 4 years old, she's taking Taekwondo. It's the cutest thing ever.
That's hilarious.
But anyway, we're talking, and I said, you remember Russell, right, May? And she said, yeah. I said, he had a pink belt in ballet. He used to say he had a pink belt in ballet. And May looked at her mother and said, what's wrong with Russell?
Oh my God.
Of course, Anna said, yeah, that's Russell, May.
She saw it, right? All it took. That's it. She had him pegged. That's so funny.
Yeah, he had the best sense of humor. I mean, there was a TV show. I'm watching Arrested Development. I didn't watch it when it was first out, but I'm catching up on it. And somebody on the show said a joke like, you ask me what makes me so funny, and you ask and you go, what makes you so, and as soon as they say it, you go, timing, before, right? That was one of the first jokes Russell's father told me.
Really?
Yeah. Russell's father used to go, you want to see my pride and joy? You're thinking like his family.
Right.
He would take out a picture of the bottle of Pride and Joy, the two cleaning things. This is my pride and joy. And Russell still has that in his wallet now.
That's hilarious.
He wrote some funny lyrics too, Russell.
Oh,
Ugly Lady, the lyrics are in the book, and just she closed the light, she hit the switch with a good hand.
I know. It's like you're trying to picture this woman in your head. You're like, oh my God.
Right. She's looking at me. I couldn't sleep,
And then the music that's wrapped around it. It's so like they should not belong together, but they do.
They do. So funny. So funny.
Goodness. And a lot of that, I'm sure, carried on in the studio and on tour, certainly.
Oh, there were times we had to stop the session. We were laughing so hard at things. Even Phil Ramone, and Phil had that same humor. I don't think I even mentioned in the book where Phil once was eating pizza. He got a new shirt, brand new shirt he's wearing to the studio. Beautiful shirt. Loves it. He's eating pizza. Little sauce gets on it, takes the napkin, wipes it off. More sauce, wipes it off. Finally, it drops the sauce again, and he looks at the pizza. He goes, you want the shirt? Take the fucking shirt. There you go. He just takes the slice of his shirt.
That's hilarious. That's so good.
Me and Russell used to make up these excuses of why we were late getting to the studio. I did this one thing where Russell actually wrote it about how I was watching The Family Feud on TV, and my television blew up, and my glasses went flying, and I couldn't see, and my wife had to get me to the eye doctor or something. A really long story, right? So I give the note to Phil first. He reads this whole note about my glasses flying, and I can't find them, and all this kind of stuff. Russ comes in and hands Phil a note. He opens it up and just says, Russell was late because he got hit with a pair of flying glasses. It's hilarious.
What do you think are some of the most invaluable things that Russell brought to the table? What made him being a part of this band so important?
He knew music. I mean, he knew rock and roll. What Billy lacked, if you hear on the earlier albums before us, is there was no real rock and roll in there. It was great songs.
Oh, sure.
But the music was done by studio musicians, and it sounds like that.
Right.
We came in there, and Topper was a rock band, that, like you said, we took all this weird stuff and it became a pop song,
Right.
But, and we brought that rock to Billy, and Russell knew that rock really well. He knew that less was more. He knew, how to get around that guitar without getting in the way of things, which is difficult to do with any instrument when you have a piano player, because Billy's all over the place.
Sure. Yeah.
So you really have to know where you're fitting in. And Russell did that really well. And a great songwriter too. Evident of Karen Carpenter doing his tunes.
That experience both, with writing and playing in rock and roll and all those different elements we've talked about, I think that led to a lot of what was important about, those recordings as well, because it does say, written by Billy Joel, but you all had a hand in shaping
Right.
how these songs ended up.
Exactly. I can remember sitting in the studio and I could not figure out what to play on Set de Trois. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm trying everything. And I can see Russell doing the same thing that Phil Ramone did on Just the Way You Are, playing a little something in air drums. And I'm thinking like, that could be cool,
Yeah.
But that's the way that the band was. I could tell David Brown, why don't you try this? Or, I remember telling Richie what to play in stiletto on the organ. Bop, 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 just very percussive,
Yeah.
and things like that. And Richie telling me, like, why do you hear good, only good are young? It's good, you're gonna drive me crazy, and stuff like that. We did that for each other. If it wasn't for Russell, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today, because I probably would not have pursued the career that he poked me with a needle and said, you need to do this. I need you to do this. That's what it was more like. It wasn't you need to do this. It was, I need you to do this. The dream was always that we would play together.
Yeah.
And he had that dream. It was like, I need you to do this because I need you for me to complete this vision that I have.
Well, I say one, you say two. I sing and two and on my quiz and three, maybe four, little baby. No, won't you take me back? I don't drive, won't go far. I'll bring a walking and walking a ride in your car, little baby. So take me back again.
Lib, thanks so much for talking with us. I know you and Russell go so far back, and you two have such a connection that clearly remains to this day. So it was great having you share some memories of Russell.
Yeah, unfortunately, due to scheduling, I couldn't hop on that call. But I got to say, on top of hearing all these great stories about Russell, just hearing you and Liberty banter is a treat in and of itself. A few episodes ago, we published our long interview with Richie Cannata and mentioned that it was originally for an upcoming episode. Well, clearly this is that episode. And what we're going to play today is all new. None of this is repeated from the one we put out a few episodes back. Like we said, we kind of did all our talking about Russell, and then the conversation just went from there, and it was so great that it warranted its own episode.
And in this segment, we had a chance to talk more specifically with Richie about working with Russell back in the 70s and 80s and their musical relationship and friendship back then.
So here's Richie Cannata.
I first met Russell, of course, when I joined the band. Liberty and Doug and Russ were working together before, so they all knew each other. I was basically the new guy. It wasn't really a guitar player's situation where, he wasn't shredding. It was more like comping, and Billy had certain things that he needed for him to do. Russell was more of a songwriter guitar player. It was more like Russell knew parts, and he had a good rhythm style of playing. Russell and I were immediately friends and are probably more friends now. His personality is very funny, very dry sense of humor, loves the Yankees like I do, which bridges us together a whole bunch. As we get older, what do you have? Well, it's a path to meeting God at some point, but that path is fun when you can talk with guys who you've been around with for 40 years, and it's just a wonderful, the set of jokes become even funnier and funnier as we get older. And he'll come up with the most driest thing. Just when you think that it's really quiet in the room, he'll come up with something and he'll make his belly laugh. Russell was always there. Him and his wife were always just friends of ours. And I think it's awesome. Him and Suzanne have stayed married all this time. It's like a safety blanket, for me when Russell's around. I just feel very comfortable when he's there. He's a dear friend. I could talk to him about anything at any time. He always picks up the phone. He's a true, honest friend, and I love him.
Well, I don't know what to do, baby. get back on my feet.
Again, thanks, Richie, for sitting down with us. It's always a pleasure to hear your stories, and it was a real treat to get your thoughts on Russell here.
Yeah, that conversation was just a gift that keeps on giving.
We also had the opportunity to sit here with Jesse Javors, who is Russell's son. Jesse has a unique perspective, as he was born in 1977, as things were really taking off in the Billy Joel world. So we had a chance to sit down and get his perspective on growing up with your dad in a famous band and, getting to see your dad on MTV as a kid. We heard some really interesting takes and some experiences that not too many people have.
When you were a kid, when did you become aware of the fact that your dad was Billy Joel's guitarist? Like, when did the gravity start to sink in?
I think it was probably a process that took a little while for me to realize, growing up, it was inextricably linked to my childhood. I had guitars all over the house and things of that nature, but it probably was when I went to see my dad at work, going to either Nassau Coliseum or Madison Square Garden, and then, seeing him up on stage playing. That's probably when it really sunk in. But then, of course, with the MTV videos and show me another kid on the block who could turn on MTV and see their dad.
Yeah, that's certainly unique.
The band, the Liv and Doug and everybody, these were family. These were just people that I grew up with. I was the first kid in the band, I think. And, this was just part of everyday life. It probably would have been weird if it was something else because I didn't know any different. You got to remember too, I was born in 1977. So there were a good portion of that was not registering with me until a lot later in life. But yeah, I do remember, I think like when it came to matter of trust, I very much remember my dad going into wherever I think they were in the city recording.
I want to ask this because we recently spoke with Richie Kanata and he talked about how, even now he practices from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Did your father practice a lot in the house on his own?
Absolutely. When I think about my childhood in those years, it always involved him playing guitar somewhere. So we had a little studio of sorts in the basement. So, he'd be playing down there doing that. But really, and I don't think this has anything to do with necessarily when an album was being recorded or whatnot. My dad's a guitar player. He's a singer-songwriter. He plays guitar. That's just part of who he is. So that happened and happens all the time. So that was very much a part of growing up.
You spoke a bit about, going to see your dad at Nassau or MSG, things like that. Do you have any specific early memories when, those early times actually going to see what your dad did?
I think back to MSG, I think back to Nassau Coliseum and going to see him play there. And, for me, it was certainly cool to see the show, but it was cooler to run around backstage. And, I used to bring my skateboard and I used to just sort of explore, go under the stage when everybody was playing. So it was a really cool time. And what was really fun about those times too is that, the band really made me feel like, because I was one of the first kids, like I was part of something. So I even remember having my own little Lords of 52nd Street jacket.
That's awesome.
Which was really cool. And, of course, all the backstage passes and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, it was a great time and it was a good atmosphere and good vibe. I mean, I was young, but just, that camaraderie, even that I felt of being in a band, being able to see what that sort of must have felt like for my dad. It was really great. And again, of course, these folks, they were family. These were the people who my dad, Lib and Doug, he grew up with them.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
and in fact, my mother and uncle, grew up with Liberty. I think even before he met my dad. It just, when I say it was family, it's because it truly was, and that was really my memory of those days.
You could feel that close connection that they had, and that's why when Billy finally flipped the switch to Turnstiles and wanted those guys together as a unit in the studio and on the stage, you could really feel the close connection that they all had together.
That close connection just wasn't from being friends. It was from all the work they put in together as musicians with my dad's band Topper growing up. I think, if anyone should probably get a credit on those old records, it should be my grandmother and grandfather, because, they hosted the creation of that band in their basement for many years. And I feel like that's where that sound was really created. My dad would tell me stories about how he'd been playing with these guys for so long that they just had this innate sort of understanding of what everyone was about to do or knew what needed to be done, that isn't just something you bring together and get overnight. Post Billy, my dad started a new career. He became a very successful executive in the toy industry and had a real long career with that. And in addition to the work that he did in that space, he also was always connected back to the music industry. I remember him working on various different projects and some really cool stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, at post Billy was a big career change. But when I look back at that from the eyes now of an adult, thinking about, wow, that is quite a pivot. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him in how not only he did it, but in how he handled himself during that. So it was really, I think, something to learn from. And everybody thinks of my dad as having played guitar with Billy Joel, which, of course he did. And that was a huge defining thing.
Yeah.
However, when I think of him as a singer-songwriter. I think of him as, in my opinion, really one of the best songwriters there are. And I wish that folks would be able to hear this music and hear it the way that I heard it growing up. I play guitar. I consider myself to be a musician, and that inspiration to do that was drawn directly from not only seeing my dad play with Billy, but seeing him play around the house and just how powerful his music is in the way that he plays it. So, I think of him first and foremost as a singer-songwriter.
Seeing his songs on like the Karen Carpenter record, for example, I'm like, that made perfect sense because he's a guy I could see writing for so many people. He can do the silly, the tongue-in-cheek. There's some of the funny stuff I remember hearing on some of the early Topper material. But he could also go real deep. And I've always seen Russell as a songwriter that can really go anywhere. I'd love to see both him and other people do his material.
You mentioned the Karen Carpenter record. I mean, I think as a testament to what a songwriter he is, she recorded a bunch of songs for that album. And, Paul Simon had several songs on it. And I think my dad had just as many songs on it, if not more, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But I mean, that's the company that, that he was in. But apart from even songwriting, he had such a unique guitar playing style. They used to call him the Sultan of Subtle. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
What I think of in terms of his guitar playing style is somebody who is always doing something in service of the song, not trying to showboat and he can,
right.
But he doesn't. And he is a very rhythmic, percussive player that derives a lot of power in what he doesn't play. I think a lot of those spaces and the empty space, and that takes a lot of discipline and awareness. This is also why I think people need to hear his music, because when you pull everything else out and you just hear somebody playing guitar, it really shines through even better. But he's just a fantastic guitar player as well.
And I always thought he served those Billy songs so well. And you're right. It's in some of those songs, nothing will jump out at you per se, but if you take it away, it's a whole different thing.
It's funny because the music that I gravitate towards is more of folk and blues and things like that. But I feel like there's so many similarities in the way that he plays as a solo musician with a lot of those other more solo styles.
Have you discussed with him at all about getting some of his music out there? I know he's recording back in the day, but I mean, he's been writing and recording for years, and it's a shame no one's really heard it yet.
Hopefully that'll come to pass one of these days. Again, I look at this through the lens of how I heard his music growing up as a kid, which was him playing it on the couch at home. And to me, that was the first thing I heard before ever I heard any of the recordings of Topper. So that is what I associate with.
Right.
And to me, that is the way it should be played, not with the band. And I often talk to him about this, but I truly hope that he does release some stuff, and that as part of that, he can let people hear how he is as a solo musician.
If there's anything we can do to help facilitate that, I'd be happy to.
We'll start the petition. Yeah,
it needs to be heard.
Yeah. Did your dad play around with a lot of different guitar sounds and styles? I mean, we've been talking about how he really plays in service to the song and things like that. At home, was he a little more experimental, or did he tinker around with a lot of different things that you might not hear him play on a record?
Well, I mean, he's a huge fan of the Beatles and early rock and roll and also reggae. I remember, a lot of reggae sort of stuff, if you got into a record or whatever. Yeah. But thinking back to that time, it was really his acoustic stuff that he was playing. That is, I guess, it really is his own style. So that's my primary memory. I'll tell you what I do remember, though, is, thinking back to when those videos would come on MTV. I will say it was a little eerie how dead on the hair and makeup team nailed for the longest time, because he really did grow into that look, I feel like.
You talk about how there was that real sense of family, that real sense of camaraderie. When you heard that the Lords were getting back together, even just for the Long Island Music Hall of Fame reunion, what were your initial thoughts about that?
I think my initial thought was, I don't think their original jackets and T-shirts are going to fit. No, but I mean, seriously, it's great. I remember just thinking this would be so cool if it could even evolve into something bigger, which it, of course, then did. They all sound so great playing together that to go on and not try and rekindle that in some way, I think would have been a shame. So it's really nice that they're able to keep doing it. I've seen a couple of their shows. They don't come through Tennessee very often, so it's tough to see stuff down here. But yeah, I mean, they all just sound so great together. It's truly amazing that you never lose it. And in fact, I think they sound even better. From what I understand of their shows now, they try and change up the set list quite a bit. So there's always either something to keep them busy, remembering how to play or reinventing.
Right. Yeah.
Do you remember if your dad was necessarily excited or a little nervous or sort of wondering what the reunion was going to be like? Or did it feel like it was just more natural for him to pick it back up?
They did something that not a lot of people ever get to do. and that is to create the soundtrack to so many people's lives. And whether it's, people playing the songs at home or getting to play it in front of large crowds, I've got to think any opportunity to do that has to be welcomed. So I don't know for sure, but that would be my take.
Yeah.
As you got older, or even when you were younger and were listening to Billy's albums, were there any particular parts of your dad's playing that really stuck out to you? Any of like your favorite of your dad's moments on record?
All of my favorite songs, I hate to say, were all of the guitar songs. Visually and just sort of experientially, the song that I always gravitate to because of having this image of when I was young and watching my dad up on the stage was, Goodnight Saigon, where he would kick it off on the edge of the stage. And that one always, I think, is one of my favorites. I really like Don't Ask Me Why.
Do you think there are any parts that are really indicative of the way your father plays, because we know that he plays in service of the song and, obviously it was somebody else's band. Are there any moments that you're like, that sounds like the guy in my house, not a record?
Well, I think Keeping the Faith, for sure. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great example. But, a lot of, they're all there. You May Be Right is a good example. Don't Ask Me Why really is a good one. I mean, that's a great guitar riff and very rhythmic. That's got my father all over that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I think, too, a lot of the way that my dad plays, I want to say is influenced in part by Keith Richards and his approach to playing, which I believe he refers to as weaving, where, you've got this room for the other guitars to come in and out of. And, it's part of that machine that ebbs and flows and you're leaving space for the other person. And that's, he thinks like that as a guitar player. That mentality, shines through in his playing. It's great that the guys are out there doing this again. And I know it's something my dad enjoys thoroughly. And it's great for me to see him get back up on stage and sound as great as he sounded back in the day. So it's just it's really an excellent thing from my point of view. And I've said it before, and I'll take another minute to say it again. I think the world needs to hear my dad's music because as I think of him, while he did play guitar for Billy Joel, my father's a singer-songwriter, and his music is just as good as anything that's ever been written. And people really need to hear that.
Every night I get tired, my feet don't reach the ground. Then I'm with you. I get by 'cause I know that you need me. Baby, close your eyes. I can't sleep tonight, not because of you.
All right, Jesse, once again, thanks for speaking with us. Another great conversation. Originally, we planned to have this be a single episode, but we had such a great talk and heard so many great stories that we decided that the chat with Russell should stand on its own.
Oh, absolutely. This truly was a special conversation. I can't wait for everyone to hear it because it was really exciting and such a treat to gain more insight into Russell's life and career.
So stay tuned in a few weeks. We'll talk with Russell about his life, his career with Billy Joel, and a whole lot more.
Baby, close your eyes. I can't sleep tonight, not because because of you. All because